The justice system in Saskatchewan faces many challenges, and certainly the biggest challenge that's faced every day in this province is how the justice system responds and treats First Nations and Métis individuals and communities. There have been many innovators in Saskatchewan in the justice system over the years, the people sitting up here, prime among them, and others who are not here. People like former Dean and Professor Emeritus Roger Carter at the law school, many people in the Native and Aboriginal court worker program, and there are many other areas in which a great deal of leadership has been shown. People like Don Worm, other First Nations and Métis lawyers have dedicated their careers to honorably representing First Nations and Métis clients, and to a very strong belief in the rights and freedoms of Aboriginal people and their entitlement to be treated with dignity, respect, and understanding. And I cannot overemphasize to you how important it is to have a strong bar. And that doesn't mean a well-stocked bar, as I was joking with Don Worm this morning. A strong bar meaning members of the legal profession, including Aboriginal, First Nations, and Métis lawyers, who are trained, who adhere to the very highest standards and principles, and understand the meaning of the legal profession and the purpose of the law in our society. And there are many others here. I see Delia Opikaku in the audience, the first woman, Treaty Indian woman, to sign the rolls to become a member of the Law Society of Saskatchewan. A very important pioneer in our community, Delia, who has also dedicated her career to seeing that First Nations people were treated with dignity and honor. And we cannot underestimate, again, how difficult that has been to break down what is often a glass ceiling. Sometimes you break down a glass ceiling and there's a buckskin ceiling too. And Delia knows about that very well from when she ran for Chief of the Assembly of First Nations. But she blazed a trail and she continues to do that. So we have what I can only call as titans. We have giants in our province. There are also many people and non-Aboriginal people who have blazed a trail, some of whom are here today. Certainly Professor Norman Zlotkin. I know Norman is here. I saw him this morning. Norman, at the law school, and in his practice, going right back to work with the National Indian Brotherhood, Norman has played an incredible role. And he also has played a very big role individually for many of us in supporting us in what we've tried to do with our often limited talents and time and ability. But Norman has been a huge anchor to the legal profession in Canada in terms of Aboriginal people and Aboriginal rights. And he has taught us a great deal. Dean Brent Cotter, I don't know if Brent is here this morning, but I know his vision of the law school is one of inclusion. And then we have our tribal elders in Saskatchewan, our elders, our tribal elders in the law, like James Youngblood Henderson, Saugage Henderson. I don't believe Saugage is here this morning, but he too is a giant in the legal profession. And of course, while all of these people are professionals that are trained, work hard within a discipline, well, I wouldn't say they work outside the box. They definitely have to push the envelope. And I think that's required in a legal system in which First Nations and Métis people have had to kick the door down to be accepted, to be understood, and to be respected. And there's a great deal of work to be done, which is why I think it's important that even those people who are not trained in the law serve to remind us how important that task is. And I'm very pleased to see that Ms. Bignell is here today and attended the conference yesterday. And certainly she reminds us of our obligations in that regard. So I'd like to emphasize how important, when we talk about innovation, a skilled and professional bar is. The legal profession has enormous obligations to the public. The duty to understand how the law impacts on the real lives of citizens must not be ignored. I just finished reading the biography of Justice Emmett Hall called Aggressive in Pursuit. I believe that Justice Hall from Saskatchewan, he went on to the Supreme Court of Canada. He wrote a famous decision in the Calder case in 1973 that for the first time recognized the rights of Indian people to their lands and said that Indian people were not conquered and that there were legal rights that had to be dealt with. Justice Hall was a very important person in the history of this province, and there's a very good new book written about him called Aggressive in Pursuit. He's an important person in our community of Muskeg Lake because in the 1950s, when an overzealous Indian agent sought to have half the families of Muskeg Lake removed from the banned list, the very intelligent families, heads of families, hired Emmett Hall to fight the Department of Indian Affairs. And Emmett Hall was successful in defending those families at Muskeg Lake and putting off that farm instructor who sought to have many of the Indians struck from the rolls in the band. So Emmett Hall had that history behind him, very meaningful to our First Nation community. The Supreme Court of Canada, he made a very big decision. Recently, the Supreme Court of Canada decision, the Hyde and Tlingit cases, for the first time a unanimous Supreme Court of Canada upheld Justice Hall's reasoning, which is they recognized unanimously that Indian people were never conquered. Now, to many of you in this room, you may say, well, that's not a big deal. It's a very big deal in the law that finally, on a unanimous basis, that has been recognized. Long time coming, but very important and significant for how the law functions and how our affairs function on an everyday basis. But Justice Hall, if we go to him, he believed that lawyers have obligations, that the law is a public function. And when we meet people who have fallen down in life, those who experience injustice, discrimination, ignorance, or situations where their human dignity is not respected, that to ensure that justice is done, lawyers must become involved so that the law does not condone those situations but actively engages to advocate on their behalf. I think Mr. Justice Hall had the right spirit of the law in that respect. And I think many of our First Nations and Métis lawyers work in that context in this province. So despite all the jokes we hear about lawyers, they do restore your faith in the justice system, and they do have this public obligation. Certainly in my own career, looking back on, 20 years since I joined the legal profession and 7 years on the bench, I don't think in our careers we can do enough to uphold this concept of equality, fairness, and human rights. In the trenches of the legal system, we see far too often how this promise of equality, human rights, and respect is not practiced in reality. Many, many times, I can tell you from my own experience in the provincial court, in the criminal courts, I felt like I was yelling into a snowstorm in terms of bringing attention to the situation in that environment. For all the innovation, which I will talk about, the sad reality in my court is that things don't change very quickly. Youth, First Nations and Métis youth with disabilities like fetal alcohol syndrome still have to be sent to jail because there are no community supports. There's no capacity in the system to address the root causes of their offending behavior, which is their disability. Our approach in the justice system is still very limited by what we often call the silo approach. You have the health silo, you have the education silo, you have the social services silo, you have the justice silo. We do not bring those together in any kind of holistic approach, at least not often enough, to address root causes of offending behavior. And of course, the healing philosophies and approaches that underpin restorative justice, that would be so much part of our education and upbringing as First Nations and Métis people, they're still not very widely accepted in the mainstream justice system. They're talked about a lot, but they're not really practiced on the ground in any full sense yet.